One winter morning in a town buried under snow, a police officer walked out of his station and found a cardboard box sitting on the steps. Inside was a 5-month-old German Shepherd puppy, with her eyes tied shut, and a note that said she runs too much. He did not know then that this small, broken creature would change his life and teach him how to breathe again. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about loss and loyalty, and how sometimes the ones who arrive weakest are the ones who save us. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from today, and leave your city or country in the comments. Your place in the world matters to this story. Winter arrived in Hollow Creek, Wyoming like an uninvited god, draping the town in white and silence so thick it felt as if even time had frozen mid-breath. The sky was a pale sheet of steel. Snow fell not in flakes but in long drifting ribbons, sliding across empty streets, wrapping the brick storefronts, the shuttered cafe, the old movie theater whose marquee still blinked weak yellow letters from another decade. The wind whistled between the telephone poles and carried the smell of pine, cold iron, and distant wood smoke. It was the kind of morning that made every sound feel important. Officer Graham Rourke, 44, stepped out of his patrol car just after dawn. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that looked like it had learned patience from too many storms. His hair was dark but threaded with silver at the temples, the kind of gray that came from years of carrying other people's problems home and setting them gently beside your own. His eyes were steady, steel blue, the color of winter lakes. Yet behind them lived something quieter and heavier, a man who had not slept well since his younger brother died in a roadside accident 6 years earlier, a night that had carved a permanent hollow into his chest. Around town, people knew Graham as dependable, calm, unbreakable. They did not know how many evenings he sat alone in his kitchen listening to the clock speak for him. He closed the cruiser door with a tired hand and adjusted the collar of his thick navy winter coat. Snow clung to his boots as he walked toward the front steps of the Hollow Creek police station, the building's blue emergency lights pulsing softly against the falling white, a slow heartbeat for the town. He had just finished the night shift. He wanted coffee. He wanted warmth. He wanted the day to stay quiet. Then he saw the box. It sat at the edge of the steps, half buried in fresh snow, leaning against the brick wall as if the storm itself had tried to hide it. There were no fresh footprints, no tire tracks, nothing but drifting snow smoothing the world back into innocence. At first Graham thought it was trash, then the box trembled. He stopped. The wind pressed cold fingers through his coat. He crouched, brushed snow from the cardboard, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside was a German Shepherd puppy, no more than 5 months old. Her black and tan coat was dulled with dirt and ice, fur clumped along her legs, tiny ribs faintly visible beneath her skin. Her paws were cracked and raw, pads swollen and reddened from cold and distance. And across her eyes, someone had tied a strip of black cloth, tight, careful, cruelly deliberate, the knot pressed deep into the soft fur behind her ears. The cloth had left marks. She did not bark. She did not cry. She simply sat there, trembling, silent, as if the world had taught her that noise only made things worse. Beneath her front paw lay a folded scrap of paper, its edges wet from melting snow. Graham picked it up. His fingers shook. Runs too much. Won't stay. Name's Juniper. Don't want her back. Someone else can deal with it. He read it again and again, as if the words might change if he gave them time. Juniper. The puppy tilted her head slightly as if the name still belonged to her, as if somewhere inside the cloth and the cold she remembered that sound. Graham's chest tightened in a way he had not felt in years. Not the familiar ache of grief. Something sharper, cleaner, anger. He reached into the box and lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Her body pressed into his chest without resistance, not from trust, but from exhaustion so deep it felt older than her short life. Her heart fluttered beneath his coat, fast and frightened. "Hey," he whispered, voice low. "I've got you." She did not move, but her trembling slowed, just a little. Inside the station, the warmth hit him like memory. The front desk lamp glowed yellow against the blue of the windows. The radio murmured quietly. Coffee brewed in the back room. Graham carried Juniper into the intake area and laid her gently on a thick towel. The black cloth still covered her eyes. He hesitated before touching it. When he finally loosened the knot, his hands were careful, reverent, like unwrapping something sacred. When the cloth slid free, Juniper's eyes blinked hard against the light, pale brown, wide, far too serious for a puppy. She did not look confused. She looked like she had already decided that kindness was temporary. Graham called Dr. Celeste Vaughn, the town's on-call veterinarian. 37, slim, dark-haired, her face gentle and composed, the kind of woman who spoke softly even when the world did not deserve it. Celeste had grown up on a ranch outside Casper, had lost her mother young, and learned early that tending living things was a way to survive the ones you could not save. She arrived within 20 minutes, cheeks pink from cold, snow still melting on her coat. "This is her?" Celeste asked quietly, kneeling beside the towel. Graham nodded. Celeste examined Juniper with practiced care, fingers light, voice calm, no broken bones, mild dehydration, frost irritation along the ears. Then she lifted Juniper's legs and frowned. "These marks," Celeste murmured. "They're friction burns, repeated movement against something rough. Rope, maybe. She's been fighting restraint or running with something tied to her." Graham swallowed. Juniper did not flinch. She simply watched Graham, eyes locked on his face, as if he were the only thing in the room that made sense. Celeste filed the official intake report. Animal control regulations required a mandatory stray hold, no matter how cruel the note. No matter how obvious the abandonment, the law demanded time. Graham hated the law in that moment, but he signed the forms. That night, he did not go home. He rolled a cot beside Juniper's kennel in the holding area. The station settled into its midnight hush. Snow whispered against the windows. Juniper slept, then stirred, then began to whimper, low broken sounds, her paws twitching, legs kicking at dreams too large for her body. Graham sat up and reached through the bars, resting his fingers gently against her paw. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to run right now." Her breathing stuttered, then slowed. She pressed her nose to the metal and stayed there. Not trust, not yet, but the first pause. Outside, winter continued its work on Hollow Creek, the town wrapped in white, the police lights pulsing blue against the storm, and somewhere in the silence a small life had finally been seen. The storm did not leave Hollow Creek. By the second morning, snow had climbed the windows of the police station like a slow white tide, and the world beyond the glass looked painted rather than real. Wind carried its old song between the buildings, rattling signs, bending the frozen pines on the hills, reminding the town that winter here did not negotiate. Officer Graham Rourke had not gone home. He had slept in pieces on the narrow cot beside Juniper's kennel, boots still on, coat folded under his head. He woke when she did, when her breathing turned uneven and her small body shuddered with dreams she could not outrun. At 44, Graham's face carried the quiet erosion of a man who had stood in too many doorways delivering bad news. His posture was steady, but the night had placed new lines beneath his eyes. Still, when Juniper opened her pale brown eyes and saw him there, something in her chest loosened. The trembling slowed. Juniper was 5 months old. Her body was light and fragile, her black and tan coat matted along the legs, tail thin as if the world had been rationing her meals. Her ears, too large for her head, twitched at every sound, and her ribs traced soft shadows under her skin. She had the look of a creature that had learned to stay small. At 6:30, Deputy Aaron Pike arrived for the morning shift. Aaron was 32, lean, quick with humor, dark curls tucked under his knit cap, the kind of man who smiled with his whole face. He had grown up in Laramie, worked ranch fences before the academy, and still carried hay dust on his boots in spirit, if not in fact. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Graham on the cot. "You live here now?" Aaron asked. Graham's mouth twitched. "Just this week." Aaron's eyes dropped to the kennel. "That the dog?" Juniper lifted her head at the sound of a new voice, then lowered it again, wary. "She's on stray hold," Graham said. 5 days. Aaron crouched slowly, careful not to crowd her. "Hey there," he murmured. "You're safe." Juniper's ears flicked, but she did not move. Aaron straightened, his humor fading. "Who does that to an animal?" Graham didn't answer. He had been asking himself the same question all night. By mid-morning, Dr. Celeste Vaughn returned to check on Juniper. Celeste, 37, moved with the unhurried grace of someone who trusted her hands. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose braid, cheeks still flushed from the cold, eyes the steady green of summer fields. She had been shaped by loss, her mother's illness when she was young, a brother lost in a riding accident, and it had made her both softer and stronger than most. Celeste knelt and re-examined Juniper's paws. The swelling had not worsened, but the skin remained raw. "She's lucky," Celeste said quietly. "Another day out there, and we'd be talking frostbite." Juniper's gaze never left Graham. Celeste noticed. "She's bonded to you." Graham shook his head. "She's just scared." Celeste smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's how it starts." Paperwork followed. Phone calls, notices sent to the county. The law required every step. No shortcuts. Graham hated how slow it felt when a living thing was hurting in front of him. That afternoon, Graham reviewed the security footage again. Snow had smeared the night into green and gray shadows, but he saw it now. A thin, dark line trailing from Juniper's body. Rope. Frayed, broken. She had torn herself free. He printed still frames and sent them to local rescues. He called the highway department. He asked the cafe owner, Martha Klein, 58, round and kind, who had run the place since her husband passed, if she'd seen anything unusual near dawn. Martha shook her head, poured him coffee anyway. Near sunset, the phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Harriet Moore, 69, retired mail carrier, sharp-tongued and observant, a woman whose eyes missed nothing. "I've seen that puppy," Harriet said. "White patches on her chest. Always alone. She circles Ridge Hollow Road like she's stuck in a memory." Graham wrote the address down. Another call followed. Daniel Price, 41, a delivery driver with a slow drawl and guilt in his voice. "That dog tried to jump into my truck 2 weeks ago. A guy came out yelling, threw something at her. I left, but I can't get the image out of my head." Same stretch of road. Graham stared at Juniper's kennel. She was lying on her side now, finally asleep, breath steady, one paw hooked through the bars, as if holding the world in place. "She wasn't running because she was bad," Graham whispered to Celeste. "She was running because staying was worse." Celeste nodded. That night, the storm grew heavier. Wind rattled the building. Juniper whimpered again in her sleep, then jerked awake, eyes wild, breath coming fast. Graham reached through the bars. "It's okay," he said softly. "You don't have to go anywhere." Juniper's breathing slowed. Her body leaned into his fingers just for a moment. By the third day, the town had begun whispering about the dog. A bag of treats appeared at the front desk with a note that said simply, "For the puppy." Someone left an old wool blanket. A boy named Evan Reed, 9 years old, freckled, too quiet for his age after his father died in a mill accident, stood at the door with his mother and asked if the dog was going to be okay. Graham said, "We're trying." On the fourth night, Juniper ate half her meal without Graham sitting beside her. He marked the moment like a victory. The fifth morning arrived gray and bright with new snow. No owner had come, no call, no claim. The stray hold expired at noon. Graham signed the foster papers with a hand that barely shook. Juniper watched him from the kennel, ears forward, eyes cautious, hopeful, as if she sensed the future shifting beneath her paws. Graham knelt, opened the door, and clipped the leash to her collar. "Let's go home," he said. Juniper hesitated, then stepped forward, her paw touching his boot, then the world beyond the door. The storm outside had quieted. Snow fell gently now, like the town was finally breathing. Behind them, Hollow Creek stood still, wrapped in white, the police lights fading into the evening. Ahead of them waited something fragile and new. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. But the Ishii. The road to Ridge Hollow curved through a frozen valley like a pale scar. Snow clung to the fences. Pines leaned beneath the weight of ice. The sky hung low and gray, and the wind carried a silence that felt old, as if the land itself had been holding secrets since before people learned how to listen. Officer Graham Rourke, 44, drove with both hands tight on the wheel. His shoulders were set in that quiet way they did whenever something inside him refused to rest. In the passenger seat, Juniper, 5 months old, lay stiff on a thick blanket, black and tan fur dulled by winter light, ribs still faint beneath her skin, ears flicking at every unfamiliar sound. Her pale brown eyes tracked the road, the trees, the sky, then returned to Graham's face, again and again, as if mapping him into the world so she would not lose him. Graham had not slept much the night before. The town had whispered about Juniper all evening. Someone left a bag of dog food by the station door. Another person dropped off a collar. A boy named Evan Reed had slipped a hand-drawn picture under the glass, a puppy with wings, standing in the snow beside a tall man with a star on his chest. Graham folded it and put it in his pocket. They reached Ridge Hollow just as daylight thinned into afternoon. The houses were scattered far apart, old farm structures leaning under decades of snow and wind, paint stripped by time. Graham parked near the turnout Harriet Moore had described. Harriet, 69, sharp-eyed and direct, waited by her truck, wool scarf wrapped tight around her neck, boots dusted white. "She's been coming here for weeks," Harriet said, nodding toward the line of trees beyond the fence. Always that same stretch of land, always alone. Graham crouched, unbuckled Juniper's leash, and let her step down into the snow. Her body went rigid. Her nose dropped to the ground, her tail tucked low. "Easy," Graham murmured. "I'm right here." Juniper moved in a small circle, sniffing, then stopped. Her ears pinned back. She lifted her head and stared at the old house across the field. A squat gray building with boarded windows, yard littered with rusted metal, a chain coiled near the porch like something waiting to wake up. Graham felt his jaw tighten. A pickup truck rolled in behind them. Daniel Price, the delivery driver, stepped out. He was 41, tall, weathered, with the tired eyes of someone who carried other people's packages and his own regrets. "That's the place," Daniel said. "Guy who threw something at her, lives alone, never waves, never talks." Juniper took one step toward the house, then stopped, body trembling, breath quickening. Her paws scraped at the snow as if she were deciding whether to flee or fight. Graham knelt beside her. "You don't have to go there," he whispered. Juniper turned her head and pressed her nose briefly against his sleeve. Then she stepped back. That was all Graham needed. He radioed the station, filed the report. Animal control would handle the rest. They returned to Hollow Creek as dusk fell. The storm returned with them, snow thickening, sky bruised purple. At home, Juniper paced the house. Graham's home was small, one story, cedar siding, a single porch light that hummed softly. The inside smelled of old coffee and pine soap. There were no pictures on the walls, only empty nails where frames once hung. Juniper moved from room to room, nose low, checking corners, doors, windows, tail tucked like a question mark. "She's searching for danger," Celeste had said the day before. "It's what animals do when they've learned safety can disappear." Juniper stopped at the front door. Saturday. Watched. Graham knelt beside her. "No one's coming," he said gently. Juniper's head turned toward him. That night she barely slept. Every sound from the wind made her flinch. Graham stayed on the couch, one hand hanging down so Juniper could touch it whenever she needed to remember he was there. By the second week, the routine began. Slow mornings, short walks, no pressure. Graham spoke to her constantly, not because she needed the words, but because he did. He told her about his brother, how they used to fish the river in summer, how laughter used to fill the house like sunlight. He told her about the way grief had taught him silence. Juniper listened. Her head tilted. Her eyes never left his. On the 10th day, she ate a full bowl of food without looking up. On the 12th day, her tail lifted once when he came through the door. On the 15th, she brought him a pine cone and dropped it at his feet like it was something holy. Graham laughed out loud, surprised by the sound of himself. Winter pressed hard against the house. Snow buried the mailbox. The wind wrote songs on the windows. Inside, something warm was growing, slowly, carefully, the way spring begins long before anyone believes in it. Then came the morning at the park. The old riverside trail was empty, frost clinging to the trees like lace. Graham unclipped Juniper's leash. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from hope. "Go," he said. "You're safe now." Juniper looked at him, then ran. Her legs stretched wide, coat flashing against the snow, ears pinned back, body light and free. For the first time, her running did not look like escape. Graham smiled. Then Juniper disappeared into the trees. 5 minutes passed. 10. Graham's smile faded. He called her name. His voice echoed into nothing. Panic bloomed sharp and sudden. He ran the trail. He searched the riverbank. He drove the surrounding roads, heart slamming against his ribs, every memory of the box, the note, the rope crashing back into him at once. And then he saw her. Juniper was sitting at the steps of the Hollow Creek police station, exactly where he had found her. No barking, no movement, just waiting. Graham slammed the car into park and ran. He dropped to his knees in the snow in front of her. Juniper turned her head slowly and looked at him with eyes that asked the same question they always had. Is this where I am safe? Graham pressed his forehead to hers. You don't have to come back here anymore, he whispered. I'm the door now. Juniper's body sagged. Her tail thumped once against the concrete. The storm settled into the town as night fell. Snow drifted quietly over the old steps. Graham carried Juniper to the car, her head resting against his shoulder. The world finally still. Winter pressed against Hollow Creek as if it were trying to push the town off the map. Snow stacked itself along rooftops, against fences, against the world. Even the sky looked tired. But inside Graham Rourke's small cedar house, something had begun to change. The first sign was the silence. Not the heavy silence that had filled the rooms since his brother's death, the kind that pressed against the ears and made memory louder. This was a different silence, softer, warmer, a silence that breathed. Juniper, 5 months old, still moved through the house like a soldier on patrol. Her black and tan coat had begun to regain a faint shine as the weeks passed, though her ribs were still visible beneath her skin. Her pale brown eyes watched everything, every creak of the floor, every gust of wind against the windows, every shadow sliding across the walls. But the panic in her movements was beginning to lose its edge. Graham, 44, tall, broad, with winter settling quietly into his hair, learned her language the way people learn a new country. The twitch of her ears meant the wind, the tightening of her jaw meant a memory. The small circles she walked around the living room meant she was counting exits. He did not rush her. Morning became ritual, coffee for him, warm broth over kibble for her. They walked to the end of the block and back, then 2 blocks, then 3. Graham spoke constantly, not because Juniper needed words, but because he had spent too long living without them. He told her about the river in summer, about the way his brother used to laugh when the fish slipped the line, about how grief had taught him to move quietly through his own life. Juniper listened with her whole body, her head tilted, her ears lifted, her eyes stayed on his face. By the 3rd week, she slept without crying, not deeply, not fully, but without the broken sounds of fear. One evening, snow thickened outside the windows, blurring the street into a white river. Graham sat on the couch, his boots by the door, coat folded beside him. Juniper paced, then stopped. She crossed the room, curled beside his feet, rested her chin on his boot. Graham froze. He had not been touched like that in years, not by anyone who needed him. He let out a slow breath and rested his hand on her back. Juniper did not flinch. Her body sank into the floor. For the first time, she slept. Spring was still far away, but something inside the house had shifted. By the 5th week, Juniper's tail lifted when Graham came home. By the 6th, she brought him objects. First the pine cone, then a mitten, then the remote control. Each time she placed the item at his feet like a gift. Graham laughed more often now. The sound surprised him every time. Celeste Vaughn visited once a week. 37, calm, observant, her dark hair pulled loose beneath her winter cap. She watched the changes in Juniper's posture, her weight, her eyes. She's doing better, Celeste said quietly. Slow, but real. Graham nodded. She saved me. Celeste smiled. That happens. Winter did not loosen its grip. Snow kept falling. Wind kept howling. But inside the house, Juniper began to explore not like a guard, but like a puppy. She chased shadows, slid on the kitchen floor, barked once at the vacuum and then hid behind Graham's legs, offended. Graham found himself putting photos back on the walls, old ones. Him and his brother on the river, their mother's smile, a world he had packed away because it hurt too much to see himself happy. Juniper sat nearby, watching, tail tapping the floor. The night before the park, Graham barely slept. The idea had been growing in him for days. Juniper had begun walking with her head high. She responded to wait, to leave it, to her name. He thought she might be ready. The morning came pale and cold. The river park lay empty beneath a sky the color of steel. Snow clung to the trees like lace. Graham unclipped Juniper's leash. "Go," he said. "You're safe now." Juniper looked at him for a long moment. Then she ran. Not the frantic run of fear, a wide, powerful run. Her coat flashed against the snow. Her body stretched, her ears pinned back in the wind. Graham felt something inside his chest loosen, something he had been holding for years. Then Juniper disappeared. 5 minutes passed. 10. Graham's breath caught. Panic hit him like ice water. He ran the trail, called her name until his voice broke, searched the riverbank, the trees, the frozen fields. Nothing. He drove the streets of Hollow Creek, heart pounding, every memory of the box, the rope, the note crashing over him. Then he saw her. Juniper sat at the steps of the police station, exactly where he had found her. No movement, no sound, just waiting. Graham slammed the brakes and ran. He dropped to his knees in the snow in front of her. Juniper turned her head and looked at him. "Is this where I belong?" Graham pressed his forehead to hers. "You don't have to come back here," he whispered. "I'm the door now." Juniper's body sagged. Her tail thumped once against the concrete. Snow drifted around them. The blue lights of the station glowed softly in the storm. The world kept moving, but something sacred had happened. The storm softened the night before they came. Snow still lay thick on the roofs of Hollow Creek, but the wind had finally loosened its grip, and the town woke beneath a pale, fragile sky, as if winter itself were holding its breath. The streets glimmered with frost, the river frozen into a silver ribbon beyond the trees, and for the first time in weeks, the light felt gentle. Graham Rourke woke before dawn. He did not know why. His body simply refused sleep, as though it already understood what the day would carry. Juniper lay on the rug beside the couch, her black and tan coat now fuller, healthier, the faint outline of her ribs no longer visible. She lifted her head when Graham moved, ears rising, eyes steady on him. Her tail tapped the floor once, soft, hopeful. Graham knelt and rubbed behind her ears. "Big day, girl," he whispered. She did not know what that meant, but she knew the tone. Her body leaned into him, and he stayed there longer than necessary because something in his chest already felt too tight. At the station later that morning, Celeste Vaughn stood by the front desk reviewing paperwork, her dark hair pulled into a loose knot, her green eyes scanning the forms with professional calm. She had changed into her navy coat, the one she wore when emotions were expected to appear. When she saw Juniper at Graham's side, her mouth curved into a small smile. "She's beautiful," Celeste said, strong now. Juniper lifted her head at the sound of her name, and then settled, sitting perfectly at Graham's heel, as if she had been born there. The family arrived just after 10. The father, Thomas Hale, 38, tall and broad with kind eyes and the steady hands of a carpenter. His jacket still smelled faintly of pine and sawdust. The mother, Rachel Hale, 36, soft-spoken, warm-faced, her brown hair tucked into a wool hat, eyes bright with careful hope. Between them stood their daughter, Lucy, 8 years old, thin, pale, quiet, her small hands buried in the pockets of her red coat, as if she were afraid the world might take something else from her if she wasn't careful. They had driven 2 hours through snow and ice. They had lost their old dog the year before. Lucy had not spoken much since. When Lucy saw Juniper, she froze. Juniper saw Lucy too. Something passed between them that no one in the room could name. Lucy knelt slowly on the floor and extended one mittened hand. "Hi," she whispered. Juniper stepped forward without hesitation. She sniffed the glove, then gently pressed her head against Lucy's chest. Lucy laughed. It was the first laugh Graham had heard from the child since they walked in. Rachel covered her mouth with one hand. Thomas's shoulders dropped, the way men's shoulders do when something inside them finally unclenches. Graham felt his chest hollow and full at the same time. They talked in the small interview room. Paperwork, rules, schedules, vet history. Graham answered every question because that was his job now. Juniper lay at Lucy's feet, relaxed, eyes half closed, as if she had always been meant to be there. Celeste leaned close to Graham while the Hales filled out the forms. "This is good," she whispered. "She needs a family." Graham nodded. His voice did not work. At noon, the adoption was approved. Rachel brought out a new collar from her bag. Soft leather, pale blue. Juniper's name stitched carefully across it. They walked together into the winter sunlight. Snow crunched beneath their boots. Thomas opened the back door of their SUV. Inside was a thick blanket and a small stuffed bear waiting on the seat. Graham knelt and slipped the new collar over Juniper's head. The leather shone against her dark fur. "There," he said softly. "You're theirs now." Juniper did not move. Lucy tugged the leash gently. "Come on, girl." Juniper took one step forward, then stopped. She turned, slowly, and walked back to Graham. She pressed her head into his leg and stayed there, her whole body trembling. The street went silent. Rachel inhaled sharply. Thomas did not speak. Lucy watched with wide, solemn eyes. Juniper did not bark. She did not pull. She simply stood there, asking with everything she had. Graham dropped to his knees. His hands found the fur at the back of her neck. He felt her shaking beneath his fingers. The father finally exhaled. "Sometimes," Thomas said quietly, "they choose." Rachel nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "She already has her home." Lucy stepped forward and hugged Juniper around the neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "I think you saved him." Graham did not argue with whatever power had arranged this moment. He went back inside and filled out the final form himself. Permanent adoption. When he returned, Juniper was sitting exactly where he had left her, eyes never leaving the door. Graham clipped the leash to his own wrist. "Let's go home," he said. That night, Juniper slept on the rug by the couch, breathing slow and steady, her body no longer ready to run. Graham sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees, the quiet of the house no longer heavy, but kind. Winter still wrapped Hollow Creek, but it had finally lost its teeth. Spring did not arrive in Hollow Creek all at once. It came in small permissions. The snow began to loosen its grip. The river sighed beneath thinning ice. The sky carried more blue than gray. And in the quiet cedar house at the edge of town, something invisible finally healed. Juniper, now 6 months old, no longer slept with one eye open. Her black and tan coat shone in the pale sunlight, fuller, stronger, her paws toughened, her movements steady. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. The pale brown of them no longer held the old question. They held certainty. Graham Rourke, 44, carried that certainty with him everywhere. He stopped rushing. He stopped counting the hours between grief and sleep. He started coming home before dark. Juniper followed him everywhere, her shadow on the floor, her breath in the room. She waited at the door when he left for his shift. She sat on the porch at dusk. She lay beside the couch while he read, or simply stared at the fire. And something extraordinary happened. Juniper returned with him to the police station, not as a stray, but as a presence. The first was a shepherd mix named Toby, 2 years old, brought in after being found tangled in wire, thin and shaking, refusing food, refusing touch. Toby had eyes like cracked glass and a body that folded into itself as if the world had become too loud. Juniper walked straight into his kennel, curled beside him without ceremony, and stayed there for an hour. The next morning, Toby ate. Then there was Luna, a husky with frostbitten ears and a broken leash still knotted around her neck, wild with panic, snapping at anyone who came close. Juniper lay outside her cage, her back to the bars, her tail resting against the door like an invitation. Luna stopped barking. Celeste Vaughn watched from the hallway, arms folded, wonder in her eyes. "She's teaching them," she said softly, without words. Graham just smiled. The house changed too. Photos returned to the walls. New ones joined them. Juniper in the snow, Juniper in the river, Juniper asleep with her head on Graham's boot. The quiet no longer felt empty. One evening, as the last snow melted from the yard, Graham stood at the window with Juniper sitting beside him. "You would have liked her," he said aloud, thinking of his brother. "She knows how to stay." Juniper's tail tapped the floor once. The town noticed. Children stopped by the porch. Old men nodded at the dog like she was something sacred. Harriet Moore brought biscuits every Sunday and told everyone, "That dog taught Winter manners." And Graham believed her. By summer, Hollow Creek bloomed again. The river laughed, the hills softened, the world remembered green. Juniper ran now not from fear, but from joy, and Graham finally ran with her. Sometimes God sends miracles wrapped in the form of something small and wounded. Juniper did not speak, but through her courage and loyalty, she reminded one broken man that love still lives and that hope still walks beside us, even in the coldest seasons of life. In our own days, when the world feels heavy and the road feels long, we must remember that God is always working quietly in the background, arranging moments of healing and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel so you can continue walking with us through stories of faith and miracles. May God bless you and your family with peace and protection and new beginnings. If you believe in this message and in the power of God's love, please comment, Amen.